Hey everyone, Drew's Apiary here. Today I am going to be doing a little bit of hive area cleanup, pretty much bee yard cleanup. I'm going to be moving some stuff around, not very far, just kind of sliding some boxes and making some room. Got some new wood boards, some treated wood that I'm going to be using for hive stands this year. Most of the wood that I've used in the past has been non-treated. So my main hive bodies are going to be on treated wood. I'll probably still keep those old blocks of untreated stuff and just use it for other things, but kind of want to get the bee yard cleaned up. I also am going to be going over swarm stuff today. I kind of follow some forum stuff online, and I'm part of some bee club and some local area news Facebook groups about beekeeping, and in my area people are already starting to get swarms, which is not surprising. Like I said, today is February 18th, so we're not even March 1st yet, which is usually when most beekeepers are getting ready to put out all their traps. But I'm actually going to put one trap out in my yard, more so as kind of a defensive measure against one of my hives swarming. It's too cold for me to go into any of my hives right now. I might change that in the next week or so and try to get in and just double check the brood chambers, make sure they're not preparing for something like that, because here in north central Georgia, we've had drones year round. We've barely had a winter, as I've mentioned. I have a feeling that swarm season is going to be a little earlier than it normally is, or it'll be in full swing by March 1st. Whereas for me last year, it felt like it was the middle of March when things started. So I'm just going to put a preemptive, swarm trap in my bee yard. I'll show you guys that, how to bait it. I've got some frames that I can show you what I'm going to do with that. And then pretty much other than that, I'm just doing some other basic stuff, painting some wooden equipment that I'm going to be using for beekeeping this year that needs to be painted, just basic housekeeping stuff. So I'll do that. I'll clean up the yard real quick, and then we'll go right into the swarm trap. Alright, so I'm up here elevated in the bee yard. I'm up in a tree house that was built on this property a long time ago, before I ever was using it for keeping bees. And the one thing I'm going to use this area for is as my defensive swarm trap stand. Obviously, not everyone has a tree house in their backyard, and to be honest, you really don't need one. You can just hang a swarm trap in your yard. Probably not as close as this one is. This is, maybe if you watch my other videos, you see this is only like, gosh, I don't know, 10 yards away from actually where the bees are kept, but it's pretty highly elevated. We're probably 20-25 foot up in the air, so on average higher than most people are hanging their swarm traps. But today what we're going to be doing is I'm going to show you my swarm trap setup. So right here, this is just a screen bottom board that I've got. If I had a solid bottom board at the ready, all mine are in another location, I'd probably use that instead, but I'm gonna use what I got. So obviously we got our screen bottom. Some of the things I'm gonna do to bait the hive is, some of the things that we'll use to bait the hive, I'm gonna use a few dead bees that I just found on the landing boards of some of my hives. So unfortunately there's some ladies which have sadly passed on. I'm going to put them in there. I'm going to seal up the bottom, because again, this is a screen bottom and I don't want it during the cold months to stay open. Some beekeepers in the South do leave them open year round. I'm not one of those ones. There we go. So that's all the way in there. Get my hive body on there. Again, this is not the design of swarm traps I'm going to be using for the ones that are going to hang to actually catch swarms. Again, this is more of a defensive swarm trap. So I'm just using a deep body. We'll see how that goes, as far as, God forbid if last spring I definitely had a swarm, and I'm going to try to do something about that this year by preparing, because again, there definitely are plenty of drones this time of the year, more so than there were last year. And I just feel like it's imminent that it's going to happen, that we're going to start to see swarming happen. And it's just too cold for me to get in the hives, but I'm going to have this swarm trap at the ready in case when things warm up next week, you know, God forbid something does happen, you know, at least I had this in place to hopefully catch one of my own swarms. I'll also probably start setting up the swarms to actually catch wild bees sometime next week. So got my entry introducer, that's obviously going to go in the front. All right, cup. And then as far as frames that I'm going to be using, I'm just going to be taking, a lot of these are just blank empty frames, you know, nothing drawn on them. So I'm going to put 8 of those in here. The good news is some of these empty frames though that never were drawn out were either somewhat propolized, and you want to make sure that whatever you're putting into your beehive for the purpose of catching a swarm has that bee smell, as they call it. So anything that's going to make the bees think that other bees lived in it at one point in time, they're going to prefer it. So some of these frames are completely clean and then others are not, and so I'm kind of doing a mix match of some of those. But I don't want to go straight just plastic frames. This was 8 right here, right? And you know, the one thing with a swarm moving is it takes a lot of resources for them to start from scratch. So you always want to make sure you use some old comb if you have it. Unfortunately, most of the old comb I have that isn't already in use in one of the hives in my apiary is super, is drawn comb on a medium frame. I mean, this is a deep frame right here. It has some drawn comb on there, so that's going on there. But this is a super. Again, I would not advise people to put, combine supers and deeps in the same box, because then you're going to have issues where bees are going to be drawing out wax on the bottom of this. It's going to be a whole mess, but I'm trying to work with what I've got just to entice the bees to get in here and set up shop, and then I can rearrange as needed. Other thing to note is I'm actually keeping the wax closest to the entrance. I haven't done enough research or asked enough people to see if there's anything to that. That's just something I want to try, as in I want that smell of that fresh wax, that bee smell, to be centered near the front entrance hole, so that when the bees do, they have a better chance of knowing where it's at and hopefully moving in. The only other things I'm going to do is I'm going to be using on this defensive hive just some lemongrass oil. I do recommend for most of your bait hives to try the Swarm Commander stuff. I'm just not going to be using that on this one specifically. I'm going to do something different for this one. I'm going to put lemongrass oil. And as any beekeeper will tell you, you don't need a whole lot. And I'm going to do this 2 ways. I'm going to put some on a Q-tip. Okay, that's going to stay on the top bar. And then the only other place I'm going to put a little bit of lemongrass oil. I should also mention this hive is facing south. Not that it matters, but that is where it's at. I'm going to put a little bit right at the front entrance. All right, so that's the first part right there. All right, everything's baited. So we've got the lemongrass oil in there. Another good tip, I don't have one on me, but if you want to you can take this Q-tip that you just baited with, whether it's Swarm Commander, lemongrass oil, whatever it might be, put it in a plastic baggie. That can help keep that smell lasting longer. Fortunately, this location where I'm at, I come to this bee yard pretty regularly, so it's not that hard for me to reapply the scent, but keeping in that plastic bag that's like cracked open, that might keep it a little bit fresher for a little bit longer. So just a tip on your thing. Put my lid on, telescoping cover. That's it. We'll take a look at it from the bottom.
And there it is, just sitting up there. I said the entrance is facing us. We'll see how that works. Something I should have mentioned when we were putting in the comb in there is
you know, none of that comb that I was using, any of that has ever held pollen. It was pretty much only, you know, something that honey was, you know, stored in, or it was just drawn out wax and just maybe the bees never got to it. Something you always got to be worried about is obviously wax moths getting into your bait hives and tearing up your wax comb. From what I've noticed, the wax moths typically are going to target the frames where either brood or where there was pollen stored, more so than just plain old drawn wax by itself. It's also really cold today here in Georgia, this part of Georgia, and it probably will be for the next few days. It's in the 40s right now. You know, the colder it is, the more likely the wax moths are going to stay away. It's basically like a mini fridge, but obviously once it warms up, you run the risk of your frames being compromised over time. So I suggest you rotate your frames out, especially during the warmer days or weeks that you have them out there, at least every 7 to 10 days if you have that ability. If you don't, every 14 days is good, but just know that within 14 days, you know, there's still a strong chance if it's been warm that wax moths have already gotten to it, at least laid eggs, whether any larvae come out or not. So you may have to freeze those frames before you put them somewhere else or use them again. But yeah, other than that, that's it. That's just a quick update. Like I said, just advising that I'm putting out my swarm traps, the legit ones, to try to catch wild hives starting next week. I want to get ahead of it. You know, leave in the comments below if you're doing the same. And like I said, once I start putting out those traps, the video will be a little bit more detailed, but it'll be the same steps. The only thing will just be making sure that I, you know, it'll kind of show the process of using those hangers if that's something you're going to do. The example we did today, you know, it's already elevated just because of there being a treehouse deck that it can rest upon. And again, the purpose of that is to, you know, God forbid one of my own hives swarm, maybe I catch one of those. So I don't expect to catch any wild swarms in something like that. So that's pretty much it today. Hope you all enjoyed this. Just wanted to show you where I stand with everything and doing some, you know, tidying up everything. But other than that, you all take care and have a great week.